This is the brief on the Consumer Act of the Philippines. We're diving into Republic Act 7394 and its 2008 update, which is basically your ultimate legal playbook designed to protect everyday buyers from dangerous goods and shady business practices. I mean, have you ever felt totally ripped off and wondered how the law actually steps in to keep you physically, financially, and practically safe? First, your physical safety is the absolute top priority. You can kind of think of the government as a strict bouncer for the marketplace, because they've got the power to immediately yank, ban, or seize any consumer product that poses a danger to public health, from toxic food to faulty appliances. Second, let's look at your wallet. Sure, the product didn't physically hurt you, but did you get scammed buying it? Well, the law outlaws deceptive sales practices, meaning it explicitly bans pyramid schemes, false advertising, and those manipulative tactics where sellers prey on a buyer's ignorance or lack of time. Finally, how do we actually enforce all this honesty on a day-to-day basis? Through strict labeling. Everything's got to have a clear price tag and use the metric system. Now, you might be wondering, why did the government issue a whole new set of rules in 2008 just for labels? Well, importers were cheating. The 2008 update put a stop to that, mandating that imported products must feature permanent English or Filipino translations right on the packaging, banning those cheap, easily removable stickers that hide sketchy ingredients. Ultimately, these laws force businesses to play fair, ensuring you get exactly what you pay for, without risking your health or your hard-earned cash.
Welcome to The Architecture of Trust, an operational playbook for the Consumer Act of the Philippines, also known as Republic Act 7394 and DAO 2008. RA 7394 establishes consumer protection as a structural foundation of the economy. By aligning operations with these statutory boundaries, enterprises gain a competitive advantage: total consumer trust. This framework covers 4 phases: creation, presentation, transaction, and post-transaction. The regulatory ecosystem is mainly governed by the Department of Trade and Industry, or DTI, and the Department of Health, DOH. The DTI focuses on non-DOH covered consumer products, warranties, weights and measures, price tags, deceptive sales practices, and fair packaging. The DOH focuses on consumables and sensitive goods like food, drugs, cosmetics, devices, and hazardous substances. Phase 1 focuses on product quality and safety standards. The safety mandate requires all products to conform to established domestic or international quality standards. The recall protocol allows agencies to order the immediate recall, ban, or seizure of injurious products. The 48-hour failsafe grants those affected a hearing within 48 hours of a ban or seizure. Adulteration zero tolerance applies to food, drugs, and cosmetics that are legally adulterated under specific conditions. Phase 2 details the anatomy of a compliant package. Key elements include the registered trade or brand name, net quantity in the metric system, mandatory translation of instructions into English or Filipino, origin and distribution details, and warnings about hazards and expirations. Phase 3 diagnoses prohibited sales practices, which fall into 2 categories: deceptive practices, which involve misrepresenting the product, and unconscionable practices, which involve exploiting the consumer. Red flags for deceptive practices include false claims about condition, sponsorship, or performance. Unconscionable practices include exploiting physical or mental infirmity, illiteracy, or charging excessive prices. The retail environment is regulated through weights and measures, price tags and markings, and advertising and promotions. The metric system is mandatory, and instruments must be calibrated every 6 months. Price tags must be publicly displayed, and no alterations or erasures are permitted. Sales promotion campaigns require a permit, and pyramid sales schemes are strictly prohibited. Transparency in consumer credit mandates full disclosure of the true cost of credit in writing. This includes the finance charge, the sum of all direct and indirect charges. The simple annual rate must be clearly stated. Consumers also have the right to prepayment and the Rule of 78, allowing for the prepayment of balances without penalty, with rebates calculated using the Rule of 78 feet method. Phase 4 introduces the matrix of defect liability. Manufacturers, producers, and importers are liable for damages caused by defective products, with specific defenses. Tradesmen and sellers assume liability if the manufacturer cannot be identified. Service providers are liable independently for defects in rendered services, with an obligation to use adequate, new, original replacement parts. Resolving imperfections follows the warranty waterfall. In Step 1, the imperfection emerges, making the product unfit. Step 2 allows for a 30-day correction window for the supplier. If uncorrected within 30 days, Step 3, the consumer's choice, grants the consumer the right to demand replacement, immediate refund, or price reduction. The fail-safe mechanism is consumer arbitration and redress. It begins with a verified complaint. This is followed by mediation and arbitration, with exclusive original jurisdiction held by consumer arbitration officers. A 15-day mandate requires a final decision within 15 days. Violations can lead to administrative sanctions, including cease and desist orders, restitution, and fines up to P300,000. The National Consumer Affairs Council, or NCAC, manages and coordinates the complete architecture of protection. This includes integrating consumer rights into education, setting safety standards and enforcing fair pricing through regulation, and ensuring meaningful public participation through representation from the private sector. Compliance becomes a competitive advantage. The Consumer Act of the Philippines guarantees that safety, transparency, and fairness are engineered into every transaction. Businesses that operationalize these standards do more than avoid legal penalties. They construct an unshakable architecture of consumer trust.
All right, let's get right into it. We've all been there, haven't we? You buy something, you're super excited, but it just doesn't live up to the hype. So what can you actually do about it? Well, today, we're going to unpack the powerful law that's got your back. I mean, you get home, you're all excited, you tear open the box, and boom, it's a total dud. That feeling of frustration, yeah, it's very, very real. Or how about this one? You see an ad that promises the world, right? It shows this incredible, life-changing miracle product, but what actually shows up at your door is, well, anything but miraculous. And this happens all the time. You're just standing there, staring at a product label, trying to figure out what you're actually buying because it's written in a language you don't even understand. Well, guess what? It turns out you have a right to know exactly what you're spending your money on. So, if you found yourself nodding along to any of that, I've got some really good news for you. You are not helpless. That feeling, it ends right here, right now. Because there's a law on the books, a powerful one, designed specifically to be on your side. So let's get right to it. We're talking about Republic Act 7394, better known as the Consumer Act of the Philippines. Now, don't let the name scare you off. Think of this less like some stuffy, complicated legal document and more like your own personal shield out there in the marketplace. You know, this law has been around since 1992, but its mission is as simple and powerful as ever: to protect your interests. It basically sets the ground rules for businesses. It's the thing that makes sure they play fair and that you, the consumer, always have a voice. It's really the foundational code for the whole marketplace. Okay, so how does this shield actually work in the real world? Well, let's start with one of the most fundamental rights it gives you, your right to clear, honest information. Basically, what you see should be what you get. And the law gets super practical about this. Article 77 lays it all out. Every single label has to show you the basics: the brand name, who made it, how much is inside, and of course, a clear price tag. And get this, that price tag can't be messed with. But here's where you need to pay attention, the real red flags to watch for. A huge one is a rule from 2008 that says the label must have an English or Filipino translation, so no more guessing games. It's a simple thing, but it gives you so much power to make a smart choice just by looking at the box. All right, let's take it a step further, because this isn't just about getting what you paid for, it's about something way more important: your health and your safety. And listen to this, because it's powerful. This isn't just a friendly suggestion in the law, it's a declared duty. Article 5 puts it right there in black and white. The state has a responsibility to protect consumers from anything that could be hazardous to their health and safety. That's the bedrock of this whole idea. So you might be wondering, what happens when a dangerous product does slip through and ends up on the shelf? Well, the law has a step-by-step plan for that. Article 10 lays out this really clear process. First, the government investigates. If they find that a product is unsafe or dangerous, they move to the next step. They can order a recall, ban it from being sold, or even seize the products. It's a really active system designed to get that harmful stuff out of the market and away from you. Okay, that's great for dangerous products, but let's talk about the much, much more common problem, right? What happens when something isn't going to hurt you, but it's just defective? It just doesn't work.
I mean, this is the scenario we've all been in. You buy a new gadget and the screen is all glitchy. Or you get a new kitchen appliance home, plug it in, and nothing. It's dead on arrival. The product is defective. So now what? What are your options? This is where Article 100 comes in, and it's a game changer. Listen to this. If a product is defective and the seller doesn't or can't fix it within 30 days, the power completely shifts over to you. You are not stuck with a lemon. You can demand a brand new replacement, ask for a full refund of your money, or you could even decide to keep the item but get a price reduction. The most important part? The choice is totally yours. And you know what? Actually making a complaint is way more straightforward than you probably think. Article 159 makes it clear you don't need to go hire a lawyer right away. You can literally just file a simple petition or a letter complaint with the right department, like the DTI. From there, they investigate, and a consumer arbitration officer steps in to hear the case and help find a solution. The whole system is designed to be accessible to regular people. But, and this is a really big but, there is a catch. Knowing all your rights is amazing, but you have to act on them. There's a time limit, and the clock starts ticking. And here is the number you absolutely have to burn into your memory. 2 years. Article 169 gives you a 2-year window from the day you bought the item to file your complaint. Now, what about those tricky hidden defects, the ones you don't notice for months? Well, for those, the 2-year clock starts the moment you actually discover the problem. So whatever you do, don't sit on it. So there you have it. The Consumer Act isn't just some old law. It's your shield. It gives you the right to clear information, the right to safety, and the right to fight back when things go wrong. It's what turns you from just a passive buyer into a truly empowered consumer. So the only real question left is, now that you know your rights, how are you going to use them?
Imagine buying a house, right? Like you sign the mortgage, you finally move in, and then you discover that the architect's blueprint practically guarantees the roof is going to collapse in 5 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a nightmare.
It is. And so you go to your files, you pull out the consumer protection laws, the exact same laws that successfully got you a refund on a defective, 1,000 peso blender last year.
Right.
And you read through it and you realize something genuinely terrifying. That same law does absolutely nothing to save your home. You are entirely on your own.
Yeah, it's a harsh wake-up call to the invisible boundaries of commercial law, for sure.
Exactly. So today, we are tearing apart the Republic Act number 7394, which is better known as the Consumer Act of the Philippines from 1992.
Along with a really critical 2008 administrative update from the Department of Trade and Industry regarding product labeling.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to map out exactly where your rights begin, how the underlying mechanisms of these protections actually work, and crucially, where your legal shield just completely ends. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into the mechanics of biological food safety, the math behind predatory loans, and the exact legal limits of modern retail.
So to really understand the scope of this whole framework, you have to look at the historical context of its drafting. I mean, the Consumer Act was passed in 1992.
Right, so just a few years out from the 1987 Constitution.
Exactly. The country was heavily engaged in rebuilding and democratizing its legal structures after decades of martial law. So the legislature wasn't just passing some minor regulatory tweak,
They were fundamentally rebalancing power.
Yes. Article 2 and Article 3 of the Act, they basically serve as a philosophical declaration by the state. They mandate that the state must protect consumer interests.
Okay.
And establish standards of conduct for business. But they actually go a step further, which is fascinating.
How so?
They explicitly state that in any interpretation of this law, the quote-unquote best interest of the consumer is the ultimate lens.
Oh, wow. So they literally wrote the bias into the law.
They did. If a contract or a situation is ambiguous, the statutory interpretation leans toward you, the buyer. The burden of clarity is shifted entirely onto the seller.
That shift from the old standard of, caveat emptor, like buyer beware.
Yeah, exactly.
Shifting from that to a default posture of consumer protection is just massive. But, a philosophical declaration doesn't exactly stop a factory from shipping a dangerous product, right?
No, definitely not. Words on a page don't stop a toxic toy.
Right. So before you even open your wallet, there's this really complex bureaucratic apparatus operating in the background. The Act mandates the creation of specialized technical committees to establish consumer product quality and safety standards.
And what really stands out in the text is the required composition of these committees.
Yeah, it's equal parts government, business, and consumer sectors.
Exactly. It's this tripartite balance designed to prevent regulatory capture.
Which makes sense. I mean, if standards were written solely by government technocrats and corporate lobbyists,
The resulting rules would probably just prioritize economic efficiency and mass production over individual safety.
totally. And on the flip side, if consumer advocates had unilateral control, the standards might become so technologically or financially impossible to meet that domestic manufacturing would just collapse.
Right. So the law actually requires a negotiated consensus. You have the maker, the regulator, and the buyer all at the same table negotiating safety. It's almost like a jury of your peers, but for products.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And furthermore, these standards aren't just like internal guidelines. The departments are legally required to publish them in newspapers of general circulation.
The mandate is basically to ensure the rules of commerce are public knowledge before a single item even rolls off the assembly line.
Okay, so let's test the breaking point of that system, because obviously things still slip through. A product reaches the market, and despite these standards, it is inherently dangerous. The law grants the government the power of recall, prohibition, or seizure. But the specific mechanics here are really interesting. The Act contains a 48-hour rule.
Yes.
It states that if a product is found to be imminently dangerous, the concerned department can order an immediate recall or ban. However, the manufacturer must be afforded a hearing within 48 hours.
Yeah, that's a really critical timeline.
Wait, if a product is imminently dangerous, like let's say a toxic toy or tainted baby formula, why give the manufacturer a hearing within 48 hours? Doesn't that risk leaving it on shelves while they argue about it?
Well, no, that's the key distinction. The ban itself is immediate.
Oh, okay.
The state doesn't wait for a judicial injunction to pull a toxic item off the shelves. The police power is exercised instantaneously to protect public health. The hearing follows within 48 hours.
Ah, I see. So it's about balancing public safety with due process.
Exactly. It acts as a bulwark against arbitrary state overreach. The law doesn't just crush businesses blindly.
So what actually happens in that 48-hour window? Because that is not a lot of time to prep a legal defense.
It is an intensely fast period of administrative triage. You don't have a traditional courtroom trial with a judge and jury.
Right.
You have administrative officers, state scientists, and the manufacturer's legal and technical teams all crammed in a room. And the burden is heavily skewed.
Skewed against the manufacturer, I assume?
Completely. The state basically says, here are our preliminary findings. Mass spectrometry shows high levels of heavy metals in your toy's paint.
And the manufacturer just has to scramble.
Yeah, they have 48 hours to either prove the test was a false positive, demonstrate that the contamination is isolated to like a single trackable batch rather than a systemic design flaw, or present a voluntary comprehensive mitigation plan.
And if they can't do that?
If they fail to provide compelling counter evidence, the temporary ban converts into a permanent prohibition, and usually the destruction of the goods.
Man, so it really forces a high-speed, evidence-based confrontation.
It does. It's a very pragmatic mechanism.
And that strict mechanism for physical safety naturally leads us to look closer at the items where safety is the most critical, right? The things we ingest and apply to our bodies.
Right. Food, drugs, cosmetics, the really intimate stuff.
The Act actually divides jurisdiction here, and the language the drafters used is remarkably precise. It introduces two completely distinct legal classifications for illegal goods: adulterated and mislabeled.
And that distinction is absolutely vital for enforcement. Let's look at adulterated first.
Okay.
A food, drug, or cosmetic is classified as adulterated if it consists in whole or in part of any filthy, putrid, or decomposed
And
substance.
it's pretty graphic legal terms.
Yeah, but here's where it gets interesting. The legal threshold doesn't actually require the state to prove a specific individual unit is actively toxic.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The law states an item is adulterated if it has been prepared, packed, or held under unsanitary conditions whereby it, and this is the key word, may have become contaminated with filth.
Oh, wow. That word may carries an immense amount of legal weight.
It's massive. It means government inspectors don't have to test every single can of soup coming out of a factory to prove it contains botulism.
Right, because if the inspector finds like an active rodent infestation on the factory floor or a severe leak in the sterilization equipment,
The entire output of that facility is legally adulterated, period. Simply because the environment stripped away the guarantee of safety.
that makes a lot of sense. So that's adulterated. What about mislabeled? Because that sounds less dangerous, physically at least.
Yeah, mislabeled doesn't necessarily mean the product is biologically dangerous. It means the psychological contract is broken.
Okay.
The labeling is false or misleading in any particular way regarding its ingredients, its weight, or its origins.
Got it. And when we delve into the chemical reality of manufacturing, the law is actually forced to abandon pure idealism for strict pragmatism, right?
What's fascinating here is how the Act addresses what it calls the tolerance for poisonous ingredients in food.
I have to admit, reading a statutory allowance for poison in a consumer protection law is extremely jarring.
It sounds terrible, right? A legal allowance for poison. But it acknowledges the mechanics of modern, massive-scale agriculture.
Right, because completely eliminating every microscopic trace of deleterious substances like soil-borne heavy metals or pesticide residues.
Or even specific preservatives that are absolutely necessary to prevent mass spoilage. It's just chemically and economically impossible.
Right. If the law demanded utopian purity, the entire food supply chain would be paralyzed by Tuesday.
Exactly. So the mechanism shifts to quantitative risk assessment. The state relies on toxicological data to establish maximum tolerable limits.
And these are often measured in strict parts per million, right?
Yeah. And as long as a manufacturer stays below that threshold, the product is deemed legally safe. But the moment a batch registers a microgram above that limit, it triggers the adulteration clauses and immediate seizure.
It's a really stark regulatory acknowledgement that we are managing exposure, not living in a sterile vacuum.
Precisely. And speaking of exposure, the Act has a very hard line on international pharmaceuticals.
Oh, this part is really strict. If a drug is banned or severely restricted for health and safety reasons in its country of origin, it is automatically banned or restricted in the Philippines.
Yep. There is no domestic relitigation of the drug's safety.
So if the European Medicines Agency pulls a drug from their market, the Philippines legally closes its doors instantly to prevent the country from becoming a dumping ground for liquidated, dangerous pharmaceutical stock.
And that automatic trigger is handled primarily by the Department of Health. But there is a massive logistical split in jurisdiction here that is very often misunderstood.
Oh, right. The DOH versus local government units split.
Yeah. The DOH is responsible for the regulation of processed, packaged foods, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals.
Right.
However, if you are buying unprocessed foods, fresh meat, poultry, vegetables, or the morning catch at a wet market, the DOH is actually not the primary enforcer.
That responsibility falls to local government units, right? The provincial, city, or municipal government. And I want to break down exactly why that split exists, because it isn't just bureaucratic shuffling. It really comes down to the local government code of 1991 and the actual biological reality of the products.
Yeah, think about the timeline of the goods. A canned good produced in a centralized factory has a shelf life of years.
Right.
The DOH can inspect the factory, test a batch, and reliably assume the thousands of cans shipped nationwide share the exact same safety profile.
But a wet market is chaotic and hyperlocal. Fish and slaughtered meat begin to biologically degrade within hours.
Exactly. You cannot have a centralized national health agency deploy technocrats from Manila to every local market at 4 a.m. to test the daily catch.
So the DOH is like the executive chef watching the packaged ingredients in the pantry, but the local mayor is the sous chef inspecting the fresh fish delivered to the back door.
That is a perfect analogy. The jurisdiction must match the speed of the transaction and the nature of the good. Local mayors and municipal health officers possess the immediate police power necessary to inspect stalls, enforce sanitary codes, and shut down vendors selling compromised perishable goods before they are consumed that very day.
The enforcement mechanism has to be decentralized to ensure a rapid response where the threat of biological degradation is the highest.
Exactly. Which perfectly frames the next layer of this law.
Right, because once we establish the item won't physically poison you, we have to look at how it is actually being sold to you.
The biological integrity of the product is totally irrelevant if the transaction itself is engineered to drain you financially.
So we are transitioning from physical safety to psychological safety. The Act broadly prohibits deceptive and unfair sales acts, But the true depth of the law lies in its definition of, quote, unconscionable sales practices.
Deception is relatively straightforward to prove, legally speaking. It involves active concealment, false representation, or fraudulent manipulation of facts. Somebody lied to you. An unconscionable act, though, is far more insidious. The law defines an act as unconscionable if the seller takes advantage of a consumer's physical or mental infirmity, their ignorance, illiteracy, or, and this is key, their lack of time.
The inclusion of lack of time is a brilliant acknowledgement of behavioral economics.
It really is.
It recognizes that coercion isn't just about lying to someone, it's about engineering an environment where rational decision-making is paralyzed. But we do have to clarify the legal boundary here.
Right, because not every rushed purchase is unconscionable.
How on earth do you prove someone took advantage of my lack of time? Like, if I am rushing through an airport terminal, my flight boards in 10 minutes, and I'm forced to buy a charging cable for a wildly inflated price because I forgot mine, is that legally unconscionable? Can I invoke the Consumer Act against the airport kiosk?
You cannot, and the law outlines exactly why.
Yeah.
Capitalizing on convenience and location is just standard market pricing.
Oh, okay.
For an act to be legally unconscionable based on a lack of time, the resulting transaction must be grossly inimical to your interests or grossly one-sided in favor of the seller.
So the state evaluates the predatory urgency, basically.
Exactly. If you buy a premium price cable because you are in a rush, you have still received a functional good at a freely accepted price. You knew the price, you bought it.
Right. It's just my own bad planning.
But, however, if a salesperson corners you, creates a false sense of extreme urgency, perhaps claiming a promotional discount expires in 30 seconds.
Oh, I've seen that trick.
Right. And they physically or verbally prevent you from reading the terms of a 5-year non-cancelable service contract that carries exorbitant hidden termination fees that crosses the line.
Wow, okay.
The unconscionability stems from the seller deliberately manufacturing an artificial time deficit to force an overwhelmingly asymmetrical contract.
So it's a difference between a high margin and psychological entrapment. And when we talk about entrapment, the act is completely unequivocal on the mechanics of certain sales structures, like chain distribution plans or pyramid sale schemes. They are strictly prohibited in the sale of consumer products.
And it is really crucial to understand the mathematics of why they are banned, rather than just heavily regulated.
Okay, let's break that down.
A chain distribution plan doesn't fail because of bad management. It fails because of geometric progression.
Right, the math is just baked in.
Yeah. If a scheme requires you to recruit 5 people, and each of them must recruit 5 people to earn back their initial investment, it scales absurdly fast.
Let's do the math on that. So level 1 is 5 people, level 2 is 25, level 3 is 125.
Right. And by the 10th level of recruitment, you would need over 9 million participants.
Just to sustain the 10th level.
Exactly. And by the 13th level, you exceed the entire population of the planet.
That is wild.
The law bans them because they are mathematically designed to collapse. They ensure the vast majority of consumers at the bottom of the pyramid suffer total financial loss to enrich the apex. It is inherently fraudulent.
And the law also heavily regulates the environment where you are arguably the most susceptible to high-pressure tactics. Your own home.
Yes, home solicitation sales are tightly constrained.
Sellers can only conduct these solicitations between the hours of 9:00 a.m. and 7:000 p.m. on working days. They are legally required to carry proper identification, demonstrate clear authority from their principal company, and provide comprehensive receipts.
Furthermore, the law attacks the specific manipulative scripts these salespeople use.
Yeah, the text explicitly forbids a home solicitation sale from representing that the buyer has been, quote, specially selected, if that is not empirically true.
It targets the exact script we've all heard a million times.
Congratulations, your home has been specially selected in your neighborhood to receive this exclusive demonstration.
Right, that exact one. The law strips away that manufactured sense of obligation. If you are knocking sequentially on every single door on the street, you cannot legally claim exclusivity to manipulate the homeowner into a purchase.
The law is basically trying to ensure the integrity of the information you receive, which is also why comparative price advertising is so strictly managed.
Oh, yes. The concept of the reduced price solution.
Right. A retailer cannot advertise a product as reduced to P100 unless the previous price was genuinely higher and was offered to the public in the regular course of business.
You cannot simply invent a fictitious original price of T500, printed on the tag with a dramatic red slash through it, and price the item at P100 to artificially stimulate a sense of urgency and value.
Right, because if pricing isn't tethered to an empirical historical reality, the consumer loses their only metric for evaluating value. The entire concept of a sale becomes mathematically meaningless.
And that reliance on empirical reality brings us to the ultimate defense mechanism the consumer possesses in the aisle: the packaging itself.
The fine print.
Yes. The fine print is where the 1992 Act and the 2008 DTI Administrative Order converge into a highly detailed regulatory framework.
Let's break down the physical box. Under the baseline 1992 requirements, a label isn't just a marketing canvas, it's a legal affidavit.
It really is.
It must clearly display the registered brand name, the trademark, the exact address of the manufacturer or importer, the net quantity of the contents, and the country of manufacture if the item is imported.
And for highly regulated items, the mandates are absolute. Cigarette packaging, for instance.
Right.
It must bear the specific warning. Warning: cigarette smoking is dangerous to your health, or its exact Filipino equivalent. And it must conspicuously contrast with the rest of the packaging typography and design. It cannot be camouflaged in the graphic art.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The packaging laws go beyond just printed words. They regulate the physical dimensions of the container. The Act specifically prohibits what it terms non-functionally slack-filled packages.
The potato chip bag illusion.
Yes. This addresses the universal frustration of opening a massive bag of potato chips, only to find it's mostly air. It is so validating that this is in the law.
It is, but the application of this law actually requires understanding mechanical engineering and supply chain logistics.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The law bans packages filled with empty space purely to deceive the consumer about the volume of the product. However, it provides vital exemptions. If the space is necessary to protect the contents, it is legally permissible.
Oh, right. Because the nitrogen gas flushed into a potato chip bag isn't just empty space, it acts as a pressurized pneumatic cushion.
Exactly. Without that specific volume of gas, the mechanical stress of palletizing, shipping, and shelving the bags would reduce fragile chips to literal dust by the time they reach the consumer.
So regulators must distinguish between the mathematically required volume of protective gas or even the necessary clearance required by the high-speed sealing machinery on the factory floor and excessive, deceptive volume added solely to inflate shelf presence.
It's a calculation of structural necessity versus optical illusion.
That is super interesting. Similarly, the physical price tags on shelves are strictly governed. It is unlawful to offer retail items without a clear price tag written in pesos and centavos.
And crucially, a retailer cannot charge a price at the register higher than what is indicated on the physical tag.
There can be no last-minute erasures, alterations, or sudden system updates that upcharge the consumer at the point of sale. The displayed price is a binding public offer.
But, while those 1992 baseline rules were really comprehensive for a domestic market, the global economic landscape shifted radically after that.
Right.
To understand the 2008 DTI Administrative Order, we have to look at international trade dynamics.
Okay, let's look at 2008.
By the late 1990s and 2000s, the Philippines' integration into the World Trade Organization and its obligations under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GAT, resulted in a massive reduction of trade barriers.
Tariffs dropped, borders opened, and the domestic market was suddenly flooded with a massive influx of foreign consumer goods.
And the practical result for the consumer was walking into a supermarket and finding entire aisles of household cleaners, cosmetics, and packaged foods covered completely in foreign text.
You couldn't verify the ingredients, the hazard warnings, or the expiration dates. You were purchasing totally blind.
Exactly. So to rectify this, the 2008 DAO mandated that all manufacturers, importers, and distributors of consumer products must provide a parallel translation in either English or Filipino.
This translation must cover the nature, quality, quantity, and safe instructions of the product. And the DTI was highly specific about the physical mechanism of this translation.
They were very strict. It cannot be a flimsy piece of paper or a temporary adhesive. The order explicitly bans stickers or removable labels that can be easily erased or detached under ordinary handling.
So the translated information must be a permanent, resilient part of the product's identity.
Right. And the enforcement mechanism for this 2008 order requires a coordinated interagency effort. The Department of Trade and Industry partnered with the Bureau of Customs.
The BOC acts as the primary filter, right?
Yes. They ensure that imported shipments meet these exact permanent labeling requirements before the products are granted entry and released into the domestic market.
If the containers are filled with non-compliant, untranslated goods, they are stopped at the port. So we've established the safety, the sales tactics, and the labeling. But commerce is physical, and things inevitably break. Let's examine the legal mechanics of liability and warranties when a product actually fails.
The foundational doctrine here is liability independent of fault.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means any Filipino or foreign manufacturer, producer, or importer is liable for damages caused to consumers by defects in their products. What makes this so powerful is that the consumer does not have to prove active negligence in the manufacturing of that specific unit.
So, if the defect originated from a flawed blueprint, a failure in the assembly line, or even inadequate hazard warnings in the manual, the manufacturer is strictly liable.
Yes, but the definition of defective requires careful legal parsing. The Act states a product is defective if it does not offer the safety or functionality rightfully expected of it, given its presentation and intended use.
Right. If a washing machine motor catches fire during a normal cycle, it is defective.
But the law explicitly clarifies that a product is not considered defective simply because a better, more technologically advanced quality product is placed on the market later.
Of course. You cannot claim your 3-year-old smartphone is legally defective just because the newest model has a faster processor.
Right. The law protects against failure to meet the promised baseline. It does not ensure against technological obsolescence.
And when a legitimate defect is identified, the Act provides a strict timeline for resolution, which is commonly referred to as the 30-day rule.
This is a great rule.
If there is an imperfection that renders the product unfit for its design consumption, and that imperfection is not corrected by the seller or manufacturer within 30 days, the consumer is granted the unilateral power to demand one of 3 remedies.
Right. A total replacement of the product, an immediate reimbursement of the purchase price, or a proportionate price reduction if they choose to keep the partially flawed item.
It prevents the endless cycle of, we'll send it to the service center, that keeps a consumer deprived of their money and their good indefinitely. The clock is set at exactly 30 days.
Furthermore, this logic extends to service firms. Repair shops, mechanics, and electronics technicians are mandated to guarantee their workmanship and the integrity of any replacement spare parts they install for a minimum period of 90 days.
And that guarantee must be explicitly indicated on the invoice.
Correct. A critical component of this liability framework is the concept of joint liability. Modern consumer goods are highly complex assemblies of components sourced from dozens of different companies globally.
Right. A TV has parts from all over the world.
Exactly. The Act states that if there is more than one person or entity responsible for the cause of the damage, they are jointly liable.
To put that in perspective, if the lithium-ion battery inside a laptop overheats and destroys the device, the consumer does not have to hire international lawyers to track down the specific subcontractor in another country who manufactured the battery cells.
No, the massive multinational brand that assembled, branded, and sold the laptop is jointly liable.
The consumer targets the entity they transacted with, and it becomes the brand's problem to seek indemnification from their own suppliers.
It massively simplifies the path to recourse for the buyer.
However, there is a profound exemption carved into Article 70 of the Act that requires careful examination. The provisions on consumer warranties do not apply to professional services.
This is a huge distinction. The law explicitly exempts certified public accountants, architects, engineers, lawyers, veterinarians, and medical professionals.
This is the exact scenario I brought up at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Right, the architect's blueprint.
Yeah. If an auto mechanic improperly replaces your brake pads and your car is damaged, the Consumer Act provides a direct path to resolution and administrative fines. But if an architect drafts a fundamentally flawed blueprint and your roof collapses, or a lawyer drafts a disastrous contract that costs you millions, this consumer law is entirely silent. Why do professionals get a free pass? Why are the stakes seemingly higher for retail transactions than for life-altering professional services?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is not that professionals are immune to liability. It is that they operate under an entirely different jurisprudential framework.
Okay.
The Consumer Act was engineered to regulate standardized commercial trades, mass-produced retail goods, and uniform services. When you buy a blender, there is an objective binary standard of function.
Yeah.
It blends or it does not.
Right, it's very clear cut.
But professional services involve highly individualized, complex intellectual judgments where outcomes simply cannot be absolute. A surgeon cannot guarantee survival in the same way a factory guarantees a television screen.
I see.
Therefore, professional malpractice is governed by specialized civil laws regarding negligence, and critically, by professional regulatory boards like the Integrated Bar of the Philippines or the Professional Regulation Commission.
So the mechanism for justice shifts from administrative consumer law to professional ethical codes and civil torts.
Exactly.
If an engineer fails, you don't go to the DTI for a refund. You go to the regulatory board to strip them of their license to practice and to civil court for massive damages. It's a different, arguably much heavier legal weapon.
Precisely. The legal tools must match the nature of the transaction. And while we are analyzing the precise mechanisms of transactions, we have to look at the mathematical integrity of commerce itself.
Right, because a consumer can be defrauded by a toxic product, but they can just as easily be bled dry by manipulated numbers.
Which brings us to weights, measures, and consumer credit. The baseline requirement is that the metric system is mandatory for all commercial transactions.
But the law goes far beyond the system used. It aggressively regulates the physical instruments of measurement, the scales at the market, the dispensing pumps at a gas station, the measuring tapes at a fabric store. All of these instruments must be tested, calibrated, and officially sealed every 6 months by the provincial, city, or municipal treasurer.
And tampering with a legally sealed scale is a severe criminal offense under the Act.
It ensures that when you pay for a kilogram of rice, the physical reality actually matches the mathematical abstraction of the price.
Right. But the most complex mathematical protections in the Act are focused on consumer credit. The state recognized that predatory lending is one of the most destructive forces to individual wealth, so it demands the full, explicit disclosure of the, quote, true cost of credit.
Just like the DOH makes you list the ingredients in a snack, the DTI is forcing lenders to list the ingredients of a loan. You have to show me exactly how much financial sodium I'm ingesting.
That's a great way to put it. Before these disclosures were mandated, a lender could advertise a heavily subsidized monthly payment while completely concealing a compounding interest rate structure that effectively doubled the cost of the asset over time.
The law now mandates that creditors must disclose the total finance charge, the simple annual interest rate, and the exact penalties for default before the consumer signs the contract.
And it protects the consumer's right to escape that debt architecture. Under Article 137, a consumer has the absolute right to prepay the unpaid balance of any consumer credit transaction at any time, in full or in part, without any prepayment penalty.
Awesome.
However, when you prepay a loan that has pre-computed finance charges, the math of how your rebate is calculated is incredibly intricate. The law frequently cites the Rule of 78 as a mechanism for this calculation.
Okay, we need to break down exactly how the Rule of 78 works, because it sounds like a neutral mathematical formula, but its mechanics heavily favor the lender.
Very heavily.
Let's look at a 12-month loan. If the interest is pre-computed, it means the total interest for the entire year is calculated upfront and added to your principal. The Rule of 78 gets its name by summing the digits of the months. 1 plus 2 plus 3, all the way to 12 equals 78.
Exactly. And the formula dictates that in the first month of the loan, the lender earns 178ths of the total annual interest. In the second month, they earn 1178ths, and so on.
Which means the interest is massively front-loaded.
Immensely.
In just the first 3 months of a 12-month loan, the lender collects roughly 40% of the total interest, even though you're only a quarter of the way through the term.
Right.
So if you decide to exercise your right to prepay the loan entirely in month 4, the rebate you receive on the unearned interest is mathematically stunted because the lender has already legally consumed the vast majority of the finance charge.
The law allows you to prepay without a distinct penalty fee, but the Rule of 78 ensures the lender has already extracted maximum profit early in the cycle.
It is a critical mathematical reality consumers must understand.
The Act also strictly differentiates between open-end credit plans, like a revolving credit card, where the balance fluctuates, and closed-end plans, like a fixed auto loan.
Right.
Each architecture has mandated disclosure requirements that must appear on every periodic statement. An open-end statement must explicitly detail the previous balance, the exact amounts credited, the finance charges added during that cycle, and the specific periodic rates applied. The architecture of the debt must be entirely transparent.
So we have mapped out a massive, highly detailed legal framework today. We have technical safety committees, strict rules on biological adulteration, bans on pyramid schemes, requirements for permanent translated labels, strict joint liability for defective goods, and mandated mathematical disclosures for credit.
It's a lot.
It is. But as anyone who has ever navigated a bureaucracy knows, a right without an accessible remedy is really nothing more than a polite suggestion. How does a consumer actually weaponize this law without spending years in a civil court over a broken appliance?
Well, to manage this vast ecosystem, the Act established the National Consumer Affairs Council, the NCAC. It is designed to coordinate consumer protection policies across the government.
And its composition is telling. It includes representatives from the DTI, the Department of Education, the DOH, the Department of Agriculture, and 4 representatives from non-governmental organizations representing both business and consumer advocacy groups.
And the inclusion of the Department of Education is definitely not accidental.
No, the Act explicitly mandates DepEd to integrate consumer education into school curricula, stretching from primary education through secondary levels and even into out-of-school youth programs.
The long-term strategy is to build a generation of citizens who possess an inherent understanding of their economic rights before they ever sign a contract or apply for a loan.
Which is amazing long-term, but for the adult who has just been defrauded today, the Act provides a fast-track judicial alternative: consumer arbitration officers.
This is perhaps the most practical mechanism for justice in the entire law. The secretaries of the DTI and DOH are empowered to appoint arbitration officers who hold original and exclusive jurisdiction to mediate, conciliate, hear, and adjudicate consumer complaints.
This totally bypasses the traditional, heavily backlogged court system.
Exactly. And the law explicitly instructs these officers not to be bound by the strict, often paralyzing rules of evidence that govern regular civil courts. Their mandate is to ascertain the facts speedily and objectively.
And the required timeline is aggressive. Once the investigation of a complaint is terminated, the arbitration officer must issue a decision within 15 days.
15.
They possess real authority, too. They can issue cease and desist orders, mandate the immediate refund or replacement of defective goods, and impose administrative fines ranging from P500 up to P300,000, depending on the severity of the violation.
Furthermore, the consumer has a specific window to file these actions. The prescription period is 2 years. You must file your complaint within 2 years from the time of the transaction, or in the specific case of a hidden defect that was impossible to detect at purchase, 2 years from the discovery of that defect.
The intention is so clear here. Administrative, rapid, accessible justice that levels the playing field between an individual citizen and a heavily lawyered corporation.
However, we must critically examine the logistical constraints built into this very system.
Right. Because looking closely at Article 160, there is a severe structural bottleneck.
Yes, there is.
The law states the department can appoint these arbitration officers, but it imposes a hard mathematical cap. Not more than 10 consumer arbitration officers per province, including the National Capital Region.
We have to look at the reality of that limitation.
Wait, 10 arbitration officers per province. The National Capital Region, Metro Manila, has a population exceeding 10 million people. It is the absolute center of domestic commerce. Is it mathematically possible for 10 arbitration officers to handle every contested price tag, every defective appliance, every deceptive home solicitation, and every case of adulterated food in a metropolis of that size within a 15-day time frame?
It is functionally impossible. And here we see the inherent tension between legislative intent and operational reality.
Right.
The drafters in 1992 envisioned localized, rapid justice. But by codifying a strict numerical cap on personnel, the system is mathematically guaranteed to become overwhelmed in dense urban centers.
The 15-day resolution mandate becomes a procedural fiction when an officer is buried under a backlog of thousands of complaints.
Exactly. It tests the endurance of the consumer, requiring them to persistently navigate a clogged bureaucracy to access the rapid justice they are legally promised.
It is a meticulously designed engine governed by a restrictor plate. It looks perfect on the blueprint, but stalls in heavy traffic.
That's entirely fair.
So, what does this all mean? We started by acknowledging the vulnerability of standing in a retail aisle, feeling completely outgunned by corporate machinery. What we have uncovered is that the environment is actually governed by a heavily armored legal framework.
It really is.
From the immediate 48-hour administrative bans on toxic materials to the strict mathematical constraints of the Rule of 78 to the mandated permanent translations of foreign labels, the state has actively engineered a marketplace where transparency is not a courtesy, but a strict legal liability. The burden of proof regarding safety, pricing accuracy, and contractual clarity has been firmly placed on the seller.
It is an incredibly robust shield. It acknowledges the imbalance of power and utilizes the full weight of state bureaucracy to counterbalance corporate leverage. It ensures that commerce cannot operate in the dark.
But as we close out this deep dive, there is a fundamental paradox you have to consider. This legal shield is powerful, but it is inextricably tied to the era of its creation. The Consumer Act was drafted in 1992. The critical labeling updates were finalized in 2008. I want you to look at the device you are likely using to listen to this right now. We have spent an hour dissecting a law obsessed with physical reality, the sealed scales in a wet market, the printed price tags on a shelf, the physical volume of nitrogen in a potato chip bag, the door-to-door salesman restricted to daytime hours.
It's all very analog.
Exactly. How does this architecture adapt to a reality where the store is a digital algorithm? How does a law governing printed price tags manage the reality of algorithmic surge pricing, where the cost of a ride share or an airline ticket changes dynamically every 30 seconds based on your personal data profile and battery life?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
How does a law governing 9 to 7 home solicitations protect you from hyper-targeted, AI-driven social media advertisements deployed to your feed at 2 in the morning when you are psychologically exhausted? What happens when the product isn't a physical appliance with a 30-day return window, but a digitally licensed software subscription or in-game currency that can be revoked with a server update?
Yeah, the landscape is completely shifted.
You understand your rights perfectly when you are standing in a physical aisle. But the next time you are checking out of your digital cart, you have to ask yourself, are you relying on a brilliant 20th century analog shield to fight a 21st century commerce war?
Welcome to The Debate. What if I told you that under the ultimate consumer protection law, if your brand new toaster bursts into flames, the state treats you like absolute royalty, like demanding the store fix it or refund you immediately?
Okay, I'm listening.
Right? But if the architect you hire designs a house that literally collapses, that exact same law offers you zero protection.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like a massive contradiction, or at least a very confusing way to protect the public.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're looking really closely at the Consumer Act of the Philippines. So that's Republic Act number 7394, along with its supplementary 2008 DTI Administrative Order number 01.
A very hefty piece of legislation.
Oh, definitely. And we want to figure out how this law actually operates on the ground, right? The central question is, does this framework act as a rigidly paternalistic system? Meaning, does the state mandate strict, absolute liability to perfectly protect consumers from businesses?
Right.
Or is it fundamentally a pragmatic, flexible system that dials its rules up and down depending on, well, context and industry realities? I'll be arguing that this law is indeed an uncompromising, rigid shield. It's designed to enforce strict liability and non-negotiable mandates upon businesses to ensure consumer protection is absolute.
And I'll be taking the opposing view. I think when you examine the actual mechanics of the law, it only appears strict on the surface.
Just on the surface?
Yeah. Functionally, it is highly pragmatic. It's a law riddled with exemptions, reasonable standards, and scientific release valves that make it, frankly, a highly flexible, business-accommodating framework.
Well, let's get right into the text then, because I think the foundational logic of the Consumer Act is an unapologetic exercise of state control. The state clearly does not trust the market to self-regulate.
Sure, the text implies that.
Right. So it imposes inescapable mandates. The bedrock of this philosophy is in Article 97. It states that manufacturers and importers are liable for defective products independently of fault.
Which is a heavy phrase, legally speaking.
It's a massive paradigm shift. Just to break that down for anyone unfamiliar with the legal standard, in the old days, if a product hurt you, you had to prove the manufacturer was negligent.
Right. The burden was on the consumer.
Exactly. You had to practically prove that someone on the assembly line messed up. But independently of fault means we bypass all of that. If the product is defective and it causes harm, the manufacturer is liable. Period.
Yeah.
Your toaster explodes, you get paid. You don't have to prove the factory foreman was asleep on the job. and the 2008 DTI order backs this up. It demands mandatory English or Filipino translations on all labels and explicitly outlaws the use of removable stickers to comply with labeling rules under Section 2. The state dictates the exact conditions of commerce, you know?
I hear you, but look at the actual reality on the ground. The framework projects this image of zero tolerance, but its actual engine runs on practical compromise. You point to Article 97's independently of fault as the ultimate weapon for the consumer.
Because it is.
But if you keep reading down that exact same article, the law immediately neuters that strict liability with structural carve-outs.
What kind of carve-outs?
Well, the biggest one is a state-of-the-art defense. A manufacturer is entirely exempt from this strict liability if they can prove that the defect could not have been known given the scientific and technical knowledge at the time the product was placed on the market.
Wait, so if science simply hadn't caught up to the danger yet, the company is off the hook?
Exactly. That is not strict paternalism. That is the state acknowledging the realities of industrial innovation. They are saying, we can't punish a company for not predicting the future.
I mean, I guess that makes logical sense, but...
And furthermore, look at Articles 90 and 92. These provisions grant the government sweeping powers to entirely exempt foods, drugs, cosmetics, and even hazardous substances from labeling requirements if full compliance is deemed impractical. If a rigid shield contains massive discretionary release valves for the very industries it supposedly restrains, it's not rigid at all. It is built on economic functionality.
But wait, if we are talking about the actual scope and bite of liability under this law, I want to look at how it handles everyday harm and restitution. Let's look at Article 100.
Okay, let's look at it.
It outlines the liability for product imperfections, and it explicitly states that suppliers of durable or non-durable goods are jointly liable for imperfections.
Right, meaning both the manufacturer and the retailer.
Yes, and that jointly liable part is crucial. If your new TV stops working, joint liability means you don't have to track down the manufacturer in another country or untangle a massive corporate supply chain.
You just go to the store?
Exactly. You can go straight back to the local electronics store where you bought it, hand them the TV, and demand they fix it. The immediate supplier cannot point fingers at the factory to escape their obligation to you, and the law gives them exactly 30 days to correct the imperfection.
A strict timeline.
Very strict. If they don't fix it, the consumer has the absolute power to demand a replacement or a full refund. The law treats the consumer like a monarch. If the product is unfit, the merchant must make it right, regardless of who exactly in the supply chain caused the issue.
They hold the cards for a very specific type of game, though.
But the state doesn't even let the business try to change the rules of that game. How can you claim this framework is flexible when Article 106 explicitly forbids any contractual clause that exonerates or reduces a supplier's obligation to indemnify for damages?
Well,
I mean, a business cannot sneak a clause into a terms and conditions agreement asking a consumer to sign away their right to redress. The state strips away the freedom of contract entirely in this scenario. So again, where's the flexibility there?
it's a great theory. It really is. But the math doesn't add up when you look at the boundaries of that mandate. You are focusing on the strictness of the remedy while ignoring how incredibly narrow its application actually is.
Narrow? How is it narrow?
Let's look closely at the definition of a defect in Article 97. It explicitly states that a product is not legally considered defective simply because another better quality product has been placed in the market.
Meaning, I can't sue because my iPhone 14 isn't as good as the new iPhone 15.
Precisely. The law protects the business from the relentless march of obsolescence. The state is saying to the consumer, you are entitled to basic safety, but you are not legally entitled to perfection.
Fair enough, but that doesn't negate the strict liability for actual defects.
But more importantly, if we are talking about the scope of liability, we have to talk about the example you opened the show with. We have to talk about Article 70.
The professional services exemption.
Yes. Article 70 explicitly and entirely excludes a massive swath of modern commerce from these warranty provisions entirely. Professional services like architects, engineers, doctors, lawyers, and accountants are completely carved out.
Hold on, I want to make sure I'm not getting lost in the weeds here because this has always seemed wild to me. You're saying Article 70 means the Consumer Act protects me from a bad blender but not a bad surgery?
That is exactly what it means.
Why on earth would a consumer protection law completely exempt the most complex, high-stakes transactions a person will ever engage in?
Because professional services are not mass-produced widgets. A doctor reacting to a patient's unique biology in an emergency room, or an architect dealing with unexpected soil conditions, is not the same as a factory churning out 10,000 identical toasters.
I mean, the stakes are higher, though.
They are, but you cannot apply strict 30-day replacement warranties to an appendectomy or a legal defense. The state knows this. So rather than forcing a rigid rule onto a complex reality, it drops the rule entirely for those professions.
It completely drops it?
Completely. A defective toaster triggers joint liability. A defective architectural design falls completely outside this framework. The liability is strictly contained, not universally applied.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on this, because I think you are focusing too much on post-harm remedies. You're looking at what happens after the product is already broken or the consumer is already dissatisfied.
Well, that is when the law usually steps in.
True, but the true rigidity of the Consumer Act is arguably most visible in its preventative measures. The state doesn't just wait for someone to get hurt. It aggressively micromanages the minute details of how a business must operate on a daily basis.
Micromanagement does not necessarily mean strict liability, though.
But it does mean a rigid legal environment. Let's look at price tags. Article 81 mandates price tags, which, sure, seems normal. But Article 83 explicitly dictates that there can be no erasures or alterations of any sort on those tags.
Right.
Why? Because a cashier taking a Sharpie, scratching out a price, and writing a new one at the point of sale is exactly how consumers get scammed. The state doesn't just say ensure prices are fair. It gives a granular physical mandate. No erasures.
It's a strict rule, sure, for a specific scenario.
And it goes further into structural bans. Article 53 outright bans chain distribution plans and pyramid sales schemes entirely. It doesn't regulate them. It doesn't ask them to provide transparency reports. It simply annihilates them from the legal market.
Well, pyramid schemes are inherently fraudulent, so...
But the best example of this preventative rigidity is in the supplementary 2008 DTI Administrative Order No. 01, specifically Section 6.
The labeling order.
Exactly. It establishes that any imported good must have English or Filipino translations. But here is the kicker. It explicitly outlaws the use of removable stickers to comply with that translation rule.
I've always wondered, why would a sticker matter so much?
Because imagine an importer brings in a massive crate of cosmetics from overseas. To save money, they just print out a batch of cheap adhesive labels with the Tagalog allergy warnings and slap them over the original packaging.
Okay, that seems practical.
But those stickers can peel off in transit or fall off on the shelf. If the consumer can't read the warning, they're in danger. So the state says, no temporary workarounds. It must be permanent. And Section 6 backs that up by stating that if an imported product is missing that permanent translation, it triggers immediate administrative sanctions.
Right, the penalties.
We are talking about the impounding of goods, the literal quarantine of commercial products, and mandatory repatriation back to the country of origin at the importer's expense. That isn't a flexible system. That is a zero-tolerance policy enforced with state quarantine.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are equating bureaucratic specificity with zero-tolerance rigidity. And I think those are two very different things.
How so?
Yes, the law outlines specific penalties, like quarantine for a missing translation. But who gets to decide what goes on the labels in the first place? Who decides what constitutes a safe product? You claim zero tolerance, but the enforcing agencies are given infinite erasers by the text itself.
Infinite erasers? What do you mean by that?
Look at Article 22. The Department of Health is only required to fix reasonable definitions and standards of identity and quality for food, drugs, and cosmetics. Reasonable is the ultimate flexible legal standard.
It is pretty broad, I'll admit.
It inherently invites the government to look at industry capacity and economic cost. You don't use the word reasonable if you are building an unyielding suit of armor. But if you want the absolute proof that this law prioritizes commercial reality over absolute consumer safety, we have to talk about Article 25.
Article 25, that's the section regarding tolerances for poisonous ingredients, right?
Yes, Article 25 explicitly states that poisonous or deleterious substances are actually allowed in food if their use cannot be avoided by good manufacturing practice.
Wait, let me get this straight. You were saying the ultimate consumer protection law in the Philippines explicitly allows poison in our food?
I am. Let that sink in. The state literally tolerates poison in the food supply if removing it makes mass manufacturing too difficult or too costly.
Oh, wow. How is that even justified?
Or trace heavy metals that occur during the canning process.
Right, unavoidable natural elements.
Exactly. If the state mandated absolute 0 parts per million purity, if they truly treated the consumer as a monarch deserving absolute protection, they would mandate the total eradication of those deleterious substances. But if they did that, they would shut down the entire domestic food supply overnight.
Factories couldn't operate.
They couldn't. So instead, it explicitly bows to good manufacturing practice. The department regulates the quantity of the poison. It does not ban it outright. It regulates it to an extent necessary for public health. But the philosophical concession is baked into the text. They tolerate the poison. That is the very definition of a pragmatic, business-accommodating compromise.
Okay, that's an incredible provision, but I would frame the mechanism differently. You see Article 25 as a capitulation to industry. I see it as a necessary scientific reality that the state heavily manages.
But it's still managed pragmatism.
True, but regulating trace toxins isn't giving businesses a free pass. It's the state actively monitoring the chemical makeup of our food. But let's follow that thread. If we want to talk about how standards are formulated and whether they bend to industry, let's look at the triggers for state action. When standards are actually triggered under this law, they are absolute.
Give me an example.
Article 33, regarding banned or restricted drugs. The text mandates that drugs which are banned or severely restricted for health and safety reasons in their country of origin shall be automatically banned and confiscated by the Philippine Department of Health.
Ah, an automatic trigger.
Exactly. This is a profound structural choice. The Philippine state doesn't wait to form a consensus with local pharmaceutical companies. It doesn't launch a flexible multi-year economic impact study to see if the domestic market wants to tolerate the drug.
It just acts.
It utilizes an automatic, unyielding trigger based on international safety determinations. It outsources the safety trigger to stricter jurisdictions to ensure the Philippine consumer is not treated as a dumping ground for hazardous, rejected pharmaceuticals. That is a rigid, highly protective mechanism designed specifically to circumvent local industry lobbying.
That's a fair point regarding imported drugs, but you are highlighting an exception that proves the rule. Article 33 relies on international bans exactly because the domestic mechanism for formulating standards is fundamentally collaborative, not dictatorial.
Collaborative? How?
Let's look at how the state formulates its own domestic safety standards for everyday products under Article 7. When existing government standards are absent, the concerned department cannot simply lock itself in a bureaucratic tower and impose unilateral rules on a domestic industry.
They have to consult them?
More than consult. The text legally requires the state to form specialized technical committees and look at the mandated composition of these committees. They must be composed of an equal number of representatives from each of the government, business, and consumer sectors.
But consumer groups are given an equal seat. It's balanced.
Yes, but the point is the structure of power. It is a negotiation. The regulated industry is granted a mandated, mathematically equal seat at the table to define what constitutes a safe product in the first place.
I see.
Furthermore, Article 7 goes on to explicitly state that the private sector may, motu proprio, meaning on their own initiative, develop their own quality and safety standards, which are then submitted to the government for review.
Wait, so the industry can essentially write its own homework and hand it to the teacher to grade?
In a way, yes. Industry interests, their capabilities, and their economic realities are structurally baked into the very definition of what is safe. A truly paternalistic, rigid framework would centralize standard making entirely within the scientific apparatus of the state.
like the automatic bans in Article 33.
Right. But by legally requiring the inclusion of the business sector in the drafting of the general rules they will be governed by, the Consumer Act reveals its true nature. I think of it less like an impenetrable concrete wall and more like a thermostat.
A thermostat?
Yeah, the state dials up strict liability when the risk to public health is high, like with the banned drugs in Article 33, but it dials the rules down to accommodate industry when mass manufacturing requires leeway, like the unavoidable toxins in Article 25 or the equal representation in Article 7.
I like the thermostat analogy, but I don't think it negates my point. The inclusion of business in the drafting phase doesn't negate the strict liability once the standard is set.
But the standard itself is compromised.
Giving industry a seat at the technical committee table ensures the standards are scientifically achievable, sure. But once those standards are codified, the enforcement mechanisms I mentioned earlier drop like a hammer. The fact that businesses help design the thermostat doesn't change the fact that they are legally forced to obey whatever temperature it's set to.
If they violate it, yes.
And the consumer gets to wield the sword if they fail through the joint liability of Article 100 and the absolute ban on exoneration clauses in Article 106.
But the rules aren't universally applied. That is exactly my point. The manufacturer who can claim the state-of-the-art defense under Article 97 is operating under a totally different temperature setting.
Fair. The architect or doctor under Article 70 isn't even in the same building as the thermostat. The food processor operating under Article 25 who utilizes unavoidable deleterious substances is playing by highly flexible rules, compared to the importer whose goods are quarantined under the 2008 DTI order for using a cheap sticker. The law uses a highly sophisticated, highly discretionary set of levers. And this is precisely where we must draw our conclusions for today. When we look at the totality of the Consumer Act of the Philippines, we are looking at a text that fundamentally distrusts market self-correction. The explicit texts of RA 7394 provide an overwhelming catalog of non-negotiable mandates.
Some of them, anyway.
From the strict, inescapable joint liability that lets you return a broken TV directly to the store, to the micromanagement of price tags requiring zero erasures, to the 2008 DTI administrative order demanding non-removable language translations under threat of immediate quarantine. I believe these prove the act is primarily a rigid, paternalistic shield deliberately constructed by the state to defend the consumer against business practices.
And I maintain that a shield with so many deliberate holes is functionally a different tool entirely. We cannot ignore the profound weight of Article 97's state-of-the-art defense, which protects manufacturers from the burden of predicting the future. We cannot ignore the professional services carve-outs of Article 70.
They are significant exemptions.
And most tellingly, we cannot ignore Article 25, which explicitly allows for unavoidable toxins in food to preserve good manufacturing practice. The Consumer Act does not seek to build a risk-free market. It seeks to manage risk within the boundaries of economic reality. It is a flexible, pragmatic framework.
Well, it is clear we remain divided on the ultimate soul of this legislation. We disagree on whether the exemptions you highlight are merely practical, narrow exceptions to a generally strict rule, or if, as you argue, those very exceptions are the true defining characteristics of the law itself.
Exactly. It comes down to how one reads the mechanics of power within the text. Does the rule define the law, or does the exception?
And this reflects the immense value of reading legal frameworks through multiple opposing perspectives. Laws do not exist in a vacuum. They are the codified tension between ideal protection and economic reality.
Right. And if our listeners want to see exactly how this tension plays out in the real world, I highly suggest exploring the sections on the consumer arbitration officers, specifically Articles 160 through 166.
Oh, that's a fascinating section.
It really is. Looking at how these officers are empowered to mediate and adjudicate disputes, often without regard to strict rules of evidence, shows exactly how the rigid text meets the messy subjective reality of actual consumer grievances.
That is where the rubber meets the road. We started by asking if the Consumer Act was a rigid mandate or a flexible compromise. Perhaps the truest answer is that it depends entirely on the product in your hand and the specific section of the law you invoke. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.